kept cash under her mattress for 40 years. When she finally pulled it out, she could barely afford groceries for a month. She didn't lose the money lopped itself. This is inflation, and it's happening to you right now while you sleep, while you scroll, while you congratulate yourself for not spending that bonus. Let's say you have $10,000 sitting in your savings account today. You feel responsible, smart even. But here's the thing nobody tells you. That money is rotting. Not because the bank is stealing it, not because you're doing anything wrong. It's rotting because that's what money does when inflation exists, and inflation always exists. So how does this actually work? Imagine you're 5 years old and you have 5 candies. Your friend also has 5 candies. That's all the candy in the world. 10 candies total. Now imagine someone shows up with a candy machine and prints 5 more candies. Suddenly there are 15 candies in the world, but you still only have 5. You didn't lose any candies. You're holding the exact same 5 you had before, but now your 5 candies are worth less because there's more candy in the world. That's inflation. Except instead of candies, it's dollars. And instead of a candy machine, it's the Federal Reserve. And they're not printing 5 new ones, they're printing trillions. Between 2020 and 2022, the US money supply increased by about 40%. 40% in 2 years. That means if you had $10,000 in 2020, the purchasing power of that money dropped dramatically, not because you spent it, but because the pile of total dollars in the system got bigger. Your slice of the pie stayed the same size, but the pie got huge, so your slice, relative to everything else, shrunk. Now, the government will tell you inflation is around 3% per year. That's the official number. 3% sounds harmless, manageable. But let's do the math. If inflation is 3% per year, your $10,000 loses $300 of purchasing power in year 1. You still see $10,000 in your account, but it buys what $9,700 used to buy. Year 2, you lose another 3%, but not of the original $10,000. You lose 3% of what's left. This is compound decay. After 10 years of 3% inflation, your $10,000 has the buying power of about $7,400. You did nothing wrong. You saved responsibly, and you lost over 25% of your wealth. But here's where it gets worse. That 3% number, it's a lie. Not an intentional one maybe, but a lie nonetheless. The government calculates inflation using something called the Consumer Price Index. The CPI tracks the price of a basket of goods, food, housing, energy, healthcare, transportation. Sounds reasonable, except they keep changing what's in the basket. If steak gets too expensive, they swap it out for chicken. If chicken gets too expensive, they swap it for beans. They call this substitution. Economists call it hedonic adjustment. You and I might call it moving the goalposts. And they don't count housing the way you'd expect. They don't track home prices directly. They track something called owner's equivalent rent, which is an estimate of what you'd pay to rent the home you already own. It's a number based on a hypothetical. Meanwhile, actual home prices in many cities have doubled in a decade, but that's not fully reflected in the CPI. So when they say inflation is 3%, what they mean is, according to our evolving basket of substituted goods and theoretical housing costs, prices went up 3%. Your lived experience might be very different. Let's talk about that lived experience. In 2000, the average home price in the US was about $170,000. Today, it's over $400,000. That's not 3% per year. That's a 135% increase in 23 years. College tuition? In 2000, the average cost of a 4-year public university was about $3,500 per year. Today, it's over $10,000. Healthcare costs have more than doubled. Childcare costs have exploded. But your wages? They've barely moved. The federal minimum wage in 2000 was $5.25. Today, it's $7.25. That's a 40% increase. Sounds decent until you realize housing went up 135% in the same period. This is the quiet violence of inflation. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send you a bill. It just makes everything a little more expensive every year, forever. And if your income doesn't keep pace, you fall behind without ever changing your behavior. Now you might be thinking, okay, but I don't keep all my money in cash. I have a savings account. I'm earning interest. That protects me, right? Not even close. The average savings account in the US pays about 0.4% interest per year. Let's be generous and say you found a high-yield savings account paying 4%. That sounds better. But if inflation is 3% officially and closer to 6 or 8% in reality, you're still losing. You're losing slower, but you're still losing. This is called negative real interest rates. Your nominal return, the number you see on your statement, might be positive, but your real return, adjusted for inflation, is negative. The bank pays you 4%, inflation takes 6%, you lose 2% every year. And this assumes inflation stays at 3%. In 2022, inflation hit 9%. If you had money in a savings account earning 0.5%, you lost 8.5% of your purchasing power in a single year. The bank didn't take it, inflation did. So why does inflation exist at all? Why do governments allow this? Because inflation benefits debtors, and the biggest debtor in the world is the government itself. The U.S. national debt is over $34 trillion. That's trillion with a T. When inflation rises, the real value of that debt shrinks. If the government owes you $1 trillion today and inflation runs at 5% for 10 years, they still owe you $1 trillion nominally, but that trillion buys a lot less. They've effectively paid off part of the debt without paying anything. This is why governments tolerate inflation. It's a hidden tax. You don't vote on it, you don't see it itemized, but it transfers wealth from savers to debtors, from the responsible to the reckless, from you to the system. And here's the cruel irony. The people hurt most by inflation are the people who can least afford it. If you're wealthy, you don't keep your money in cash. You keep it in stocks, real estate, commodities, things that rise with inflation. If you own a house, inflation helps you. Your mortgage debt shrinks in real terms while your home value climbs. But if you're young or poor or just starting out, if you're saving for a down payment or trying to build an emergency fund, inflation crushes you, slowly, invisibly. There's a famous story about Germany in the 1920s. Hyperinflation destroyed the economy. People brought wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. It sounds absurd. It sounds like something that could never happen here. But inflation doesn't need to be hyper to hurt you. It just needs to be consistent. Imagine you're 25 years old today. You save $500 a month for 40 years. You're disciplined. You never touch it. At the end, you have $240,000. Sounds like a lot, except inflation averaged 3% per year. So that $240,000 has the purchasing power of about $74,000 in today's money. You saved for 40 decades and ended up with less than a third of what you thought you had. Now imagine inflation averaged 5% instead. Your $240,000 becomes $38,000 in today's purchasing power. You worked for 40 years, you saved diligently, and you lost 84% of your wealth to something you couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't vote against. This is the game, and nobody explained the rules. So what do? You can't opt out. You can't refuse to participate. The money in your account is already melting. The question is whether you're going to let it melt all the way to nothing, or whether you're going to move it into something that doesn't melt. Stocks historically return about 7 to 10% per year. Real estate appreciates. Commodities hedge against inflation. These aren't guarantees, they come with risk. But keeping your money in cash or in a savings account earning less than inflation isn't safe. It's a guarantee that you'll lose. And yet millions of people do it because it feels safe, because the number on the screen doesn't go down, because loss aversion is stronger than logic. But here's the final twist. Even if you do everything right, even if you invest smartly and your money grows faster than inflation, you're still playing a rigged game. Because the Federal Reserve can print more money whenever it wants. Because fiscal policy can flood the system with stimulus. Because the rules can change mid-game, and there's nothing you can do about it. Your grandmother kept cash under her mattress because she didn't trust banks. Turns out the banks weren't the problem. The money itself was. So here's the question nobody wants to ask. If your money loses value every year by design, if the system is built to punish savers and reward debtors, if inflation is a feature and not a bug, then what exactly are you saving for?